Hi everyone, I'm Tom from the Corona team, and we'd all like to welcome you to our very first ever live webinar for Corona Renderer. If you like this one and you find it useful, we'll plan to do these for every release of Corona. Today though, we'll be focusing on the new features that come with Corona Renderer 7. And I'm not going to steal Nate's thunder by telling you any more than that for just now. A few quick guidelines on how the webinar works. We will actually have 2 question and answer sessions during the presentation so that you have plenty of opportunity to ask your questions, one in the middle and one at the end. You can type those in either at any time during the presentation, or you can wait till the Q&A session starts. It's up to you. I'll be watching the Q&A while Nate presents, but we won't be answering your questions until we hit the Q&A segment. We'll save them and answer them then, but do feel free to ask as we go along. So with that, it's on with the show. Over to you, Nate. Tell us all about Corona Renderer 7, please.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom. Thank you for that lovely intro. And yeah, a big hello from my side as well. My name is Nate, and I'll be the voice behind this presentation. I'll be your host. And let me just officially welcome you to the Corona Renderer 7 webinar, which is the webinar that's going to be focused on the Corona Renderer 7 release. And this release is basically a release that's packed with features that are both big and small, but all of them are sort of designed to help make your workflow faster and your renders even better. Now, we're super excited. The entire team is super excited for us to showcase what we've been working on. There's been a lot of development effort put into this release. And so, you know, let's not beat around the bush too much here, and let's just dive straight into the presentation. So the question that's probably on everyone's minds right now is basically, what is new in Corona Renderer 7, right? Well, broadly speaking, Corona Renderer 7 is a release that combines new features, big new features, with overall improvements that span across the entire rendering engine. And while that's a bit of a broad statement, I'm sure all of you would like to know a bit more about the specifics, right? And if we're talking about specific feature sets, then we need to start by talking about a completely new physical material that you may find in Corona Renderer 7. Now, this new material is called the new physical material, and we sort of designed it to make your material creation process easier on you, but also to make your materials look even better because, you know, there's a lot of under the hood changes so that the realism is, you know, even greater. Obviously, we haven't stopped there. We're also introducing new features to the sun and sky model that got introduced in Corona Renderer 6, and some of these features will really enable you to do things that just weren't possible before. And then, you know, we're always trying to speed up the rendering process. So with Corona Renderer 7, you can expect quite a couple of rendering speedups. And then you can also expect rendering improvements. And by this, we mean essentially that some of the existing functionality is going to be, well, it is improved. So either it's behaving better, more predictably, or, you know, the user experience is a little bit better. Then, last but not least, we've got host software improvements. So if you're a 3ds Max user, if you're a Cinema 4D user, you'll definitely want to hang around on that part because we've got quite a couple of those as well. Now, what we're going to do next year is we're actually going to go through each and every one of these bullet points here in more detail. And we're going to start with the star of the show, the new physical material. So the next couple of slides, what you are going to see is just some internal artwork that the team created. And, you know, we created this as we were developing the physical material, you know, test driving it, fixing bugs and stuff like that. But hopefully through these images, you can see that the new physical material really enables you to do a lot of really cool materials, essentially. Now, what are some of the benefits of using the new physical material? Well, our improvements in general are focused on making it easier for you to create, you know, physically accurate materials, along with improving the realism of the materials altogether. And now, again, that's a bit of a broad statement, so let's dive deeper than that, right? So what are some of the benefits? Well, if we're being more specific than that, then we need to start by talking about the built-in Clearcoat layer that you may find in the new physical material. And so if you're creating a Clearcoat effect, that will now be easier than it was before. It's going to be more straightforward and it's going to be more realistic. Then there's also a built-in sheen layer. That's also a big one. If you're into creating fabric materials, you know that sheen effect really adds that touch of realism, and now you can get that effect from right inside the physical material. Then obviously, because the new physical material is new, there's also a new and improved material UI. So there's that's a pretty important new thing as well. And then because of all of the under the hood changes, like for example, now we're using Aura Layer as our BRDF model, you can also expect greater realism, because of all of the under the hood changes. Then obviously we have some new parameters for you to play with that are going to make certain effects a lot easier to achieve. And then there's also the Metalness Workflow there too as well. And if you're a little bit confused as to what the Metalness Workflow actually means, well, we're going to be talking about that just a little bit later on. So hold on if you're interested in learning more about the Metalness Workflow. Then another benefit of using the new physical material is the fact that it conforms to industry standards better than the previous material did. And then last but not least, we've further improved the way that glass is being rendered. So if you're using the new physical material, you can also expect glass to render even better than it did before. Now, what we're going to do next year is we're actually going to go again through each and every one of these bullet points here in more detail, so we can present all of these features to you better, right? Okay, so we're going to be starting with the built-in Clearcoat layer, which enables you to create materials that have reflective coatings, right? So for example, that would be a varnished wood material, or the different kind of car paints there are. And here's a bit of a workflow comparison. On the right, you have a node setup that you would have to do if you were using Corona Render 6 to get the Clearcoat effect going. And obviously, you see that you had to use a couple of different materials and blend them together using the Corona layered material. You probably used a Fresnel shader or a fall-off shader, to control the masking. And so that's essentially what you see on the right. That's how the workflow was in Corona Render 6. But in Corona Render 7, if you take a look at the screenshot on the left, you can see that none of that is really needed anymore. All you need is to bring in the new physical material, turn on the Clearcoat layer, and you have the Clearcoat effect going. So what we're going to do next year is we're going to demo the workflow for a bit. And so we're going to start off by demoing it in Cinema 4D. And as you can see, we have our physical material in front of us. And actually, the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to adjust the color of the base layer here, just so we can get this dark black color going on. And then we're also going to adjust the reflection blurriness just a little bit, just so that the reflections aren't quite as matte, so we're going to see things a little bit better. Then what we're going to do is to enable the Clearcoat layer. We're just going to go under the Basic tab, and we're going to enable the Clearcoat layer by clicking on this checkbox here. And just by doing that, as you can see in the material preview, and as you can see in the interactive renderer, we have the Clearcoat effect going, and it's looking really great. Now, if you go under the Clearcoat layer channels properties here, you're going to see that in here you have all your relevant parameters, right? So for example, the amount parameter, the IOR parameter, the roughness parameter, and even the absorption parameter, which we're really proud of because it is a really important physical effect that happens. And then also we have a separate bump controller, if you will, for the Clearcoat layer. So if we go under that base layer, you can see that we have a bump controller for the base here. And then for the Clearcoat, there's a separate bump controller as well. Now, if you are a 3ds Max user, the workflow is much the same, really. And so you see we have our Corona physical material in front of us right here. And all you need to do is you need to locate the Clearcoat layer and up its amount to anything above 0. And just by doing that, as you can see, we have our Clearcoat effect going on in the preview and in the interactive renderer, right? So that's how easy it is to set up. Now, as far as the rest of the parameters down here go, we're really not going to go into too much detail about them right now, but be on the lookout for our future tutorials diving deeper into those. What we are going to go into more detail is the absorption parameter. So the absorption parameter is really important because it controls what that top Clearcoat layer absorbs. And as you can see, we've set it to be red here. And now that red is sort of the absorption, the red color absorption is affecting everything that's below the Clearcoat layer, as well as the Clearcoat layer itself. And if we switch it to blue, as you can see here, that's exactly what's happening, right? Now, the Clearcoat layer is really important, not only for car paints, but for all kinds of different materials. In our example here, you can see we have this violin wood material, right? And in the example in front of you, if you take a look at a UI screenshot on the left, you can see that we have our Clearcoat disabled right now. And if we were to enable the Clearcoat and play with the absorption's color and the absorption settings, this is one of the possible materials that we would be able to get, right? And so just basically by enabling the Clearcoat layer alone, tweaking it, including its absorption parameter, you can see the difference that we can achieve. And we can essentially talk about not only putting some varnish on top, but we can essentially create a whole different material altogether just by messing with these settings. Because if you take a look at the rest of the settings, if I toggle between the two slides, you can see that they remain the same, right? So the difference here is just the Clearcoat layer and the settings in there. So again, the absorption parameter and the Clearcoat layer is a pretty important parameter that you want to play with. Now, here what we have is basically a bit of a demo of how useful the different bump channels can be, right? So if we have in front of you, we have a base layer where we have this diffuse wooden texture of the table, and then we have a bit of a bump happening. As you can see, the bump is following along those wood grains, right? And as you can see, we're getting that nice sort of feel to the wood, right? We aren't using any Clearcoat on this slide, but if we were to just simply enable the Clearcoat, now you can see this kind of looks like we've enabled a very thick varnish layer that's on top, that sits on top, right? And what's important to note here is that the base layer, the layer that's underneath the Clearcoat, still retains its bump effect like it did before, because if you take a look at the grains, you can still see how they sort of pop out and catch those reflections nicely, right? But the Clearcoat on top is, this perfectly polished Clearcoat. Now, if we were to add another bump map or a bump shader, noise shader, whatever you want to add to the bump channel of the Clearcoat, this is one of the effects that you could be getting. So now we've added some unevenness to the Clearcoat. And what's important to note here is that the base layer still retains that original bump, but now the Clearcoat that's sitting on top also has its own imperfections, right? Now, if you try to blend the two effects, together, this is one of the potential results that you could be getting. And this is looking pretty realistic, because now you have that base layer that has its own bump, right? That's following the wood grains. Then you have this Clearcoat varnish on top that's also a bit imperfect, right? And so that's a pretty important sort of control that you can have over your materials there. Right, so that's it for our built-in Clearcoat layer demo here. The takeaway is that it simplifies and enhances the Clearcoat creation process. There's no more material mixing needed, and you get that extra functionality, essentially for free. Right, then we also have the built-in Sheen Layer, which enables you to create more realistic fabric materials, such as velvets, silks, or satins, or whatever the case may be. Really. It adds that nice sort of highlighty effect that happens when you look at a fabric at grazing angles, right? And this is all now possible to be created from right inside the single physical material. So in this screenshot, again, we're comparing workflow. So on the right, we have Corona Render 6. And as you can see, we needed that fall-off shader in there, in the diffuse slot, to kind of, simulate this effect, if you will, to kind of try and get that nice highlight that happens towards the grazing angles there to happen. But if we take a look at Corona Render 7, well, all you basically need is just your diffuse map, maybe a bump map, and because the Sheen Layer is built in, all you need to do is you need to just enable it, and it'll be on just like that. Now again, we're going to demo the workflow here. So we are in 3ds Max now. You can see we have our material, our physical material set up. We have a couple of basic diffuse and bump textures plugged into this thing here. And all you need to do is you just need to up the Sheen Layer amount to anything above 0. And just like that, as you can see in the interactive renderer, you get that nice sort of grazing angle highlight effect happening that is there when looking at certain fabric types, right? Right, so then if you wanted to further break this effect, you could bring in a dirt map and then just plug it into the Sheen amount slot. And this is just going to create that extra sort of realism by breaking the effect up just a little bit in certain places, as you can see. Now, if you are a Cinema 4D user, the workflow really is pretty much the same. So the idea here is that we have our physical material. All we need to do is we need to enable the Sheen layer. And just by doing that, as you can see, we get that nice effect going, right? Now, if you wanted to mimic that sort of realism touch that we added in 3ds Max, you can also bring in a dirt map, just do the same thing, plug it into the Sheen layers amount slot. Just by doing that, you're going to add some of those nice imperfections, and that's really going to help you with the realism, right? Right. So all in all, the built-in Sheen layer makes it easier to create. It makes it easier to create the Sheen effect. Really, there's no need to mix and match different fall-off shaders and different color correction shaders and stuff like that. You just toggle it on and off you go. Right. Then let's talk about the new and improved material UI. And this is pretty big because there are some substantial changes. Now, straight off the bat, we have an addition of the Clearcoat layer and the Sheen layer. Obviously, these are things that were there in Corona Render 7. That's the UI screenshot that you can see on the left there, in the physical material. And with the Corona Legacy material that you see on the right there, we just didn't have this functionality built in, so they're not there. Now, one of the bigger changes is the way that the diffuse and reflection grouping sort of works. And so if you take a look at the UI screenshot on the right, which is the one from the Corona Legacy material, and by the way, we're now, the material that we've used throughout all these years, we're calling it the Corona Legacy material now. So the new material is the Corona Physical material, and the material that you've used up to this point is now called the Corona Legacy material. And so, as you can see, with the legacy material on the right screenshot here, we had our diffuse and reflection components split, while with the physical material, they're all sort of residing, well, not sort of, but they are actually residing under this base layer. And that sort of is there for two reasons, really. One is because the material just works differently under the hood. And the other is that this way, we're sort of making it easier for you to create more realistic materials, because you have all of these things grouped just a little bit differently than you did before. So now the base layer is essentially that sort of base layer that every sort of material has. So those basic properties, essentially. Now there's a couple of other changes here as well. If you take a look at the IOR parameter, you can see that with the physical material, we only have one IOR parameter, while with the legacy material, we had one for reflections and one for refractions. But because the new physical material is more realistic and it's more focused on creating, realistic, real-life materials, we only have one IOR because that's how materials work in real life as well. So with this one IOR, you will be controlling both the reflections as well as the refractions. Then there's obviously a couple of new parameters in here. We aren't going to cover all of them here, but we will cover some of them a bit later on. Now, if you are a Cinema 4D user, everything we set up to this point holds true for the Cinema 4D version as well. So as you can see, you have that Clearcoat layer, you have that Sheen layer that are now built into the physical material, right? And then obviously you have that base layer where all your diffuse and reflection settings now reside, right? And so again, what we set for 3ds Max, everything pretty much holds true for the Cinema 4D version as well. Now, a big new thing that we want to talk about is the addition of the Metalness Workflow. So the Metalness Workflow is basically this drop-down menu right here. And this one is pretty important. So the idea here is that with the physical material, you first need to decide whether you're creating a non-metal material or a metal material, because the UI will sort of adapt and guide you along depending on the option that you choose here. So if you're choosing a non-metal material, certain parameters will be available to you while others won't be. And the same holds true if you select the metal material, right? Some parameters will be available to you, but then some won't be. And so the UI is sort of going to guide you throughout your material creation process, and it'll make sure that you create a material that is physically plausible, right? So with this new workflow, you can't really create weird materials anymore. Like, for example, a refractive metal material, right? That just makes no sense. So if we demo that workflow here in Cinema 4D, first, well, what you're going to see is that right now we have our mode set to be non-metal, and that means we have our thin shell parameter available to us. What we also have available to us here is the subsurface scattering channel, and we can toggle it on, we can toggle it off, and then we also have our refraction channel available to us. We can toggle it on or off. If we go under the base layer here, you can see that we have our IOR parameter available to us, but we don't have our edge color parameter available to us. Now, if we switch our mode from non-metal to metal, now we don't have our thin shell available anymore. And we also don't have subsurface scattering available anymore. And we don't have refraction available to us anymore. But what we do have available to us, well, we also don't have the IOR available to us, but what we do have available is the edge color parameter, because this one is relevant for all your metal materials. And so the idea here is that the material creation process is now, more realistic, because you can't create weird fake materials anymore. And the same holds true for 3ds Max version as well. So you can create a non-metal material here, for example. You can select it, and then you can switch the IOR, for example. You can also, make this material refractive, as you can see. But what you can't control is the edge color, for example, because the edge color parameter is essentially available only to metal materials, right? So if we switch our metalness from non-metal to metal, well, now you're going to see that our thin shell parameter isn't available to us anymore. Our IOR parameter isn't available to us anymore. And our refraction parameter isn't available to us anymore. But what is available to us is the edge color parameter, right? So we can control this one as well. And so again, the idea here is that you really can only create materials that sort of make sense, right? That are physically accurate basically materials that make sense. You can't create refractive metals anymore. So that's a pretty important distinction there. Now with the Metalness workflow, it's also important to note that you can use, you can map it, right? So you can use maps or you can use shaders. And in this example in front of you here, you see that we've thrown in a bitmap, a checkerboard bitmap. And as you can see, black colors mean that that part of the material is now non-metal, while white colors mean that that part of the material is metal. And we can also use gradients, right? So you don't need to necessarily stick to clipped values like fully white or fully black. The material can also be sort of metal and non-metal in a way, right? And so you can use gradients, and so don't feel the need to be stuck to clipped values at all. Then we have another addition to the material UI, and those are the material presets. And so these are these sort of drop-down menus that you see available in front of you right here. And the main idea is that you have a bunch of presets available to you, but these presets are not, you shouldn't think of them as, your fully fleshed out materials necessarily, because these presets do not feature, any bitmaps or any shaders or anything like that. These presets essentially, just have some basic settings applied, like the IOR parameter, or if that material has some subsurface scattering and stuff like that. And these presets are really useful to you if you're trying to create a material, but you don't always want to plug in all of those IOR settings in there and stuff like that. You want some of those to already be preset to you, and then you can later tweak them on. So in the example in front of you, you can see we've chosen architectural glass for our glass on the bottom left side of the image here. For this glass, we've chosen a glass frosted preset. Then for this, water holder, we've used glass lead preset. And for the water inside, we've used the water preset, right? If you're a 3ds Max user, the workflow, again, pretty much the same. You can just choose your presets. For in this example here, we've used a brass brushed preset for our little lamp there. You can use a velvet satin preset for some of your fabrics, right? And that's sort of the idea behind the presets. They're there to help you sort of in your material creation process, so that you don't always have to dial in certain settings. They're there to be a good starting point for you. Right, and so we've been a little too fast with the slides here. No worries. The next thing that we want to talk about here is how the new physical material conforms to industry standards better. And even though industry standards in our industry are sort of loosely defined, we still wanted our material to be a little bit more conformant to some of the most common industry standards out there. Now, immediately you're going to see that now we support the roughness parameter. As a matter of fact, that's the default parameter to control essentially the blurriness of your reflections, right? What's really cool about this is that we do support the roughness workflow now, but if you like the glossiness workflow, you can switch back to the glossiness workflow as well. And you can do this on a per material basis, or you can do it in the render settings, as you can see on this slide right here. You can switch the roughness mode to either be set to roughness or glossiness, and that's going to be applied to all of your new materials in your scenes, right? So you can do that through the render settings. Or actually, I apologize. The screenshot that's in front of us shows us how we can change these settings on a per material basis. So if you go under the advanced section of each material, you can change the roughness mode to either roughness or glossiness. But if you would want to make a change that's going to be applied to all of your materials, well, then you can go into the render settings. And this is what I was talking about earlier. And you go into the render settings, and then you can choose the default mode that's going to be active for all your new materials, right? So again, you can switch between roughness or glossiness depending on whichever you prefer. Then there's also the IOR mode that we now support. We now support the IOR workflow or the specular workflow, whichever one you choose, up to you, but we now support both. Then let's talk about the updated Corona converter here for just a little bit, because we've updated it. And the idea here is that we really wanted to make this transition from the legacy material to the physical material a little bit easier. And so the Corona converter is now going to convert the legacy materials into physical materials. And there's just one note here that, generally speaking, do not expect a one-to-one match necessarily on all your materials, just because the physical material is it's a lot more realistic under the hood. It has a lot of different things happening under the hood, and so the conversion is probably not going to always be one-to-one, but it can get you there. Then we've got improved glass rendering with the new physical material. This one's a pretty big one because a considerable development effort went into improving the glass rendering algorithms, which are now based on an entirely new physical model. So that's important. Essentially, we wanted glass to render even better than it was before. Now, what can you expect here? If we're being more specific, well, you can expect the glass to render more physically correct, even more physically correct than it did before. Then you can expect thin glass to now render roughness. And then also rough glass now casts more realistic shadows, and that's also an important note. And what's even more important probably for a lot of you is that anisotropy, that's always a mouthful, now works with refraction as well. So you've heard it right. It not only works with reflections, it also works with refraction. And then, there's also overall improvements that are a bit too niche for us to list and go through. But just so you know, you can expect, if you're using the new physical material, you can expect glass to just render better overall, right? Right, now let's tackle all of these one by one here. So let's talk about how things render more correctly now, how things render better. So this image in front of you, these dices were rendered with the legacy material, right? And if we switch to the next slide, you can see the big difference that the physical material makes. So if we go between the two, you can see that the difference is pretty stark. The new physical material just, flat out looks better. Now there's a bit of a note here, because the new physical material uses a different, model to do to do glass essentially. Glossiness is working a little bit differently, and so if you used a value of 0.5, for example, for your legacy materials, well then don't expect that value to look quite exactly the same with the new physical material. Again, the new physical material is better in many ways. It's more realistic, and the glossiness sort of aspect was also reworked a bit. So that's a bit of a note there, something you can maybe pay attention to. Right, then we also have thin glass improvements, and this is pretty big for all of you ArcViz users out there, right? So the images you see in front of us, we got these window planes, right? And sort of at the top of each window plane, you can see we have these numbers, right? And those numbers sort of mean what kind of glossiness value we've used for each window plane, right? So on the far left, we've used the glossiness value of 1.0, and on the far right, we've used a glossiness value of 0.1. Now, this is how the legacy material rendered this scene. This is how the physical material renders it. So whenever you have thin glass with the physical material, you can expect, glossiness / roughness to work accordingly and properly. We're now fully supporting it. So if you're, using a lot of thin glass, well, this feature is probably going to be really big for you. Then also, rough glass now casts more realistic shadows, and this is an example that was rendered with the legacy material, and here it is with the physical material. If you pay attention to the shadows on the wall there that come from the glass and the bottle, you can see that with the legacy material, things were just a little bit less realistic, while with the physical material, you get a little bit more depth in there. And, don't expect caustics without enabling caustics, but hopefully, it gets you a little bit closer when it comes to realistic shadows from rough glass, right? Right, then anisotropy now works with refraction. This is a pretty big one because it not only works with reflections, now it also works with refractions. As you can see in the little GIF, you can change the anisotropy value and the rotation, and you can get expected results. But what's even cooler is that it also works with refractions and caustics, right? So you can see on the example here, we got this sort of thick caustics, well, essentially a piece of glass here. And as you can see, the caustics on the other side on that wall render out exactly as you would expect them to. So this is a really, really nice realism addition. All right, so I guess we are at our first Q&A session here, right? So the idea here is, you ask and we'll try to answer. And Tom is going to be our lead man on this one. So Tom, if you will.
Thanks, Nate. I'll give you a little bit of a break. Thank you for covering so much in such a short space of time. So I've been watching the questions. Some of you have replied to directly as we go, but I've pulled out a few that I'll answer here. One is, will it be recorded, the webinar? Yes, it's been recorded, and assuming the recording works, this is our first live webinar after all. It'll be up on YouTube. I don't have a time or day for you. I'm going to say probably tomorrow. So another question, are we developing for Apple Silicon? This is for our Cinema 4D users. The answer is yes, we will be doing that. But, we've got to make a start on it, make sure it's all working. We have no timeline. If you want to know when it begins and how it's going, do keep a view on our roadmap. There's one for Macs and, in this case, one for Cinema 4D. Yeah, some people have reported that the videos are a little bit choppy. Unfortunately, that's GoToWebinar for you. It does pretty good quality, but the frame rate is not fantastic. Hopefully, though, it's not interfering with your ability to understand what we're showing. So we had a question, is there a different bump for the main material and the Clearcoat material? So the answer to that is that they're not separate materials. That's the trick. In Corona 6, you would have two materials. In Corona 7, the Clearcoat is simply a layer or a parameter in the one material. And the answer is yes, you can set a different bump for the diffuse channel, the main body of the material, and a completely different bump map for the Clearcoat. And it's a Clearcoat layer rather than material. We did also have a question, is IOR the same as specular? The answer is there is no, they're not the same. So this was a question of, if you have something labeled as a specular map, can you just plug it into the IOR map and it will work? The answer is no, but the material can be changed from IOR mode to Disney specular mode. So if you have a map labeled specular, simply change your material to specular workflow rather than IOR. The slot will rename itself to specular, and you just plug it right on in. You can do that per material. You can also change the default for your system so that by default it's Disney specular, or by default it's IOR. Basically, you know, if you have 75% IOR maps, then leave the default set to IOR. If you have 75% specular maps that you've collected over the years, swap your default to specular. But bear in mind, even then, you can still change each individual material to either mode based on your needs. Okay, now we have lots of new questions come in. Now the Q&A has started, so let me scroll back up and see what we've got. How safe is it to upgrade to 7 when workflow depends on third-party solutions? My answer to that is, bear in mind that you can now install multiple versions of Corona thanks to the multi-loader. So it's perfectly safe to install 7, but also keep 6 on your system. And that way, what you can do is, you know, install 7, try it out, see how it works, because third-party applications do sometimes take time to update. You know, update exports from things like Quixel, they will have to get those exporters updated for a new physical material. And when they do that, of course, is up to them. But you can have more than one version of Corona installed. And so we have a write-up on the multi-loaders on our website. If you want to learn more about it, or contact us in the forums or by support, and we'll be happy to walk you through it. What else have we got? How many people are watching this webinar? Right now, about 390. Will the legacy material stay for more creative, less realistic results? All I can tell you is it's still in 7. Future plans, we will have to see. I don't understand how to make matte materials in physics. We need more info, Diana. Can you post that question over on our forums, on our support team? We'll be happy to help out. Give us an example, basically, of what it is you're looking to create. Control the reflection of any material. Previously, you could change the reflection color as well as the value. There are several ways of doing that. You'll find in tutorial updates we'll be doing, we'll explore it all. For example, the overall reflection intensity is controlled by the IOR, and the roughness or glossiness value, depending which workflow you want. And the easiest way to color the reflection is simply to use a Clearcoat layer with an absorption color, because the absorption color of the Clearcoat affects everything underneath it. So if you wanted, if you wanted to fake it, that's the quick way. The realistic way for metals, obviously, you can define the color of the metal. If you're talking about non-metals, you know, the reflections are pretty much always white, which is why the material is set up that way. Do feel free to pop over to the forums. We can talk about that in more detail. How to make a grape shader. That's a bit specific. please head on over to the forums. That really will need UI grabs, example vendors, so that we can show you our results. But yeah. Anyway, to convert V-Ray to legacy using Corona converter, not using the Corona 7 converter. If you still have Corona 6 installed, you know, as I mentioned, using the multi-loader, you should still have your old converter available if you wanted to do that. Will Corona be compatible with V-Ray scans? Watch our roadmap. When it comes to future plans, basically the roadmap is the be-all and end-all for current official information. Let's see. Yeah, conversion from V-Ray to Corona. Please post any problems and issues over on the forums. You think you can improve this function? We're always looking for ways to improve it. It's great if you can share example materials, example scenes where the results are not living up to your expectations and needs, because that lets us dive into those specific cases. There is no question, guys. You do an excellent job for ArcViz. Wow. Oh, thank you. Can the slate material in Max be as cool as Cinema 4D? No, because we wrote the node material editor in Cinema 4D, so of course it's cooler than anything else. Edge color, that's the metals, as I say, have non-white reflections. Non-metals pretty much are always white. And edge color defines the reflection color at grazing angles for a metal. There are some good examples in the presets. You can call those up and have a look at the values we created. And of course, just try changing the edge color. And should you want to get into super ultra realism, there is a complex IOR mode. You can look up complex IOR values online and try those out. Let's see. Oh, lots of questions, more than I can catch up with. How long have we got left on questions? I haven't been watching the time. Can someone chime in and tell me? Will there be Corona for SketchUp? There are no plans for that at the moment. The Clearcoat absorption color, basically it simply colors everything underneath it. So if I set a blue color in the Clearcoat, you can imagine that as being a layer of blue varnish or lacquer painted over the material. So everything underneath, any reflection from the base material, any diffuse from the base material, any refraction from the base material will be tinted blue. And that's the quick explanation. As I say, watch out for more detailed tutorials in the future. How fast is the render speed up? That's in part 2. We'll talk a bit more about that. Can I use different mapping types? I believe the answer to that is yes, if I understand your question properly, John. If I don't, post it on the forums with some examples, and we'll be able to dive in a bit more detail. Great first webinar, really helpful. Don't go away, because we have a whole second half still to go. Have materials create in substance render the same as in substance? That's what we would hope to. Material preview, like cube, sphere for Corona coming, that's already possible. You can define a custom scene for material previews. That's been true for a number of versions. Okay, I'm going to pause there. There are still more questions. I will, while Nate resumes, I will go through your questions and make notes because we do have a second Q&A coming up at the end. Of course, feel free to post other questions during the second half, and also feel free to post questions when we reach the second Q&A. But in the meantime, back to our kind and generous host, Nate. Take it away, Nate.
All right, thank you, Tom, and thank you everyone for all those questions. We really appreciate the back and forth we have with the community. You're a big part of what we do, obviously. So thank you for being so enthusiastic. Now, we did have some technical difficulties in the first part, so let's hope the second part goes even smoother. Now, in the second part, well, we're going to start with some more technical difficulties. What we're going to start talking about is the PRG clearance sky model. So basically what this is all about is about adding more features to the improved sky model that got introduced in Corona Render 6. Now, the improved sky model got renamed in Corona version 7 and it is now called PRG Clear Sky Model. And the PRG actually stands for PROG. Now, don't get confused here. This doesn't mean that we're simulating some sort of a local Prague sky or anything like that. The idea here is that we're just paying a little homage, to the city of Prague, because that's where our main offices are, and that's pretty much where this sky model got invented, essentially. So there's a couple of big new features here that we would like to go over with. And before we actually do that, let's take a look at a bit of an animation video here. And on the left, you can see, on the right, you can see how this animation rendered without the new effects. So essentially what you see on the right is this scene being rendered with Corona Render 6. And on the left, you can see how this scene rendered with all the new features and new effects that are there in Corona Render 7. I think we all agree this is a massive difference. Honestly, some of these features are some of my personal favorites, really. It's awesome what the team did here. Now, if we're being more specific, what are some of these new features, right? Well, one of them is the volume effect. Now, the volume effect simulates the atmosphere's effect on your scene. It's an aerial perspective type of an effect, and it affects your scene in the form of a visual haze effect that changes the appearance of distant objects. So basically, like if we really put it in layman terms, if you're staring at a really distant hill in real life, right, you're going to see that it kind of gets enveloped into this atmosphere, into this visual haze. And that's exactly the effect that we're simulating here. And simulating is a pretty important word because this effect is based on a true, physical model. Now, how it actually looks like in action, well, here we have the scene rendered with the volume effect being set to the strength of 20, right? And so this is how the scene looks like when it's set like that. If we change the volume effect strength to 80, then this is how the scene looks like. If we change it to 220, well, now you can see that this effect really becomes super pronounced, and it sort of envelops the entire scene much more. It's a lot stronger, right? And so this effect is really important because it really adds that extra flavor of realism to all your scenes, interiors and exteriors, really. Of course, for interiors, if you see out the window in the distance, this is exactly what you'll probably want to do. Then we also have the altitude parameter. So the altitude parameter is basically observer's altitude in meters. So with higher values, basically what you can expect is that the sky gets clearer and the horizon line less sharp. Take a look at the effect in action here. Here we are rendering the scene at an altitude of 0 meters. Now, if we go up to 2,000 meters, well, now you can see that horizon line, if we switch back and, back to 2,000 meters, you can see that horizon line in the distance is a lot more less distinct, right? And the sky, if you take a look at the sky, it also changes the color. It's a lot more clear. And this effect is again based on an actual physical model. So this is not just some artistic effect. It's based on the real deal, right? And if we up the altitude to say 6,000 meters, now you can see that the sky gets a lot clearer, a lot bluer, and even the lighting in the scene changes quite drastically. So this is another big one for all of you, especially for all of you who like to render, mountain cottages and stuff like that. Then we have the horizon blur parameter, which basically controls how much the sharp horizon line is blurred. But it is independent from the overall atmosphere's look. It's basically a non-physically accurate solution, but it does enable more artistic control. So this one is there basically to control that horizon line, and it's not essentially based on any of the physical models. But we figured, hey, it enables some pretty important artistic controls here, and so we've implemented it, and you can play around with it. Then we also have the turbidity parameter, which is basically what lets you control how clear or overcast your procedural sky is. As you can see in the examples on the right here, the difference between the different values. Right, okay, then we got to talk about rendering speedups. Hey, because rendering faster is always the goal, right? And Corona Render 7 is no different in that regard. On average, you can expect up to a 15% faster rendering, but it goes up to 50% in certain scenarios, right? So yeah, those are some really big changes. Now, as we said before, we're always trying to improve the speed of the render, and this version is no exception. For this release, however, we focused on speeding up some of the most common parts of the rendering process. And if we're being more specific than that, rendering is now being done in 32 by 32 pixel blocks. Then we've also improved the way that transparency and absorption is rendering. It's now rendering a lot faster. And then we've also improved the high quality denoiser speed because, hey, denoising faster, always great. Now, again, as you're probably used to, we're going to focus on each and one of these bullet points here, starting with rendering passes in 32 by 32 pixel blocks. So on average, what you can expect is a 5% speed up, right? But in the scene in front of you, as you can see, this is looks like a normal production scene. We've measured a 25% speed up in this case. And as you take a look at the rendering times, you're going to see that that is indeed the case here. Now, there is one important note with rendering passes in 32 by 32 pixel blocks, and that is that this option will not be active when you're doing interactive rendering. So it'll only be active for when you're doing final renders or when you're doing, final renders over the network, so distributed rendering or team rendering if you're SC for the user. Now, how does this essentially look like? Well, we've prepared a bit of a demo here where we've tried to isolate this effect. And as you can see, this is exactly how it looks like. Now, this is a looped demo, and we've tried to isolate it, but this is essentially what you can expect. So you still see that you get those first passes, and you still see the image sort of fully, as you can see it right now, right? But then these pixel blocks will sort of start to clear a little bit differently. So that's the difference here. Okay, then we've got faster transparency and absorption rendering, and we've measured a 30% speed up on average, but it goes up to 50% in certain scenes. And one of those scenes is in front of you, because as you can see, we've cut down the rendering times drastically here. Now, faster absorption and faster transparency rendering will mostly come into the effect when you've got non-clipped values. So for example, if you're using opacity maps, and they're not fully white or fully black, well, then you're going to get a speed gain. And that's a bit of an important note. The same goes for absorption. But as you can see, the speedups are really, they're nothing to scoff at. These are some serious speedups that we're looking at here. Then we've also got improved high quality denoiser speed, right? So it renders, it denoises faster. On average, you can expect a 20% speed up, but up to 60% in certain scenes. Now, in the scene in front of you, you can see Corona 7 took 19 seconds to render this one out, and Corona 6 took 24 seconds to render, to denoise these images. And, the idea here is if you're rendering animations, every percentage helps. 20% is a lot on average. And if you're rendering, high-res images, the speed up is going to be even more than that probably. Now, as far as all of these speed ups go, the idea here is that the more, absorption you have happening in your scene, the more transparency you have happening, the more denoising that you do, all of these speedups are essentially going to stack. And as we said, you can expect a 15% speedup on average. So that's a pretty healthy speed boost there. Right, then we've got rendering improvements next. And what we mean by this is basically that we wanted to improve how certain existing features work by either extending their functionality or making them more robust overall. So basically improving how they work. And some of these features are improved displacement, because now we've improved it, right? Then we've got some scene far from origin improvements in there as well. Now, as far as the displacement goes, this is how this particular scene rendered in version 6. And if we switch to the version 7 slide, you can see how we're getting a lot less artifacting happening. And so that's a pretty nifty improvement right there. But then here's a bit of a more noticeable example. We have this cliff asset that's being, that's being primarily driven by displacement to get its shape, right? And as you can see, there's quite a couple of things that are kind of a little bit uncool that are happening. So if you take a look at the upper left corner of the image, essentially, you're going to see that we have some fireflies happening, and on the center of the image, you can see that we have some jagged geometry, which is causing these jagged edges, right? So this is how the scene rendered in version 6, but check this out. This is how the same scene rendered in version 7. If we scroll between the two, right, you can obviously that there's a nice difference because you're not getting those fireflies anymore, and also, that jagged geometry is, well, it's not jagged anymore. It's looking much more the way you would expect it to. Right, then we got scene far from origin improvements. This one's pretty big for all of you who like to render out huge scenes, or for all of you who download models from the internet and they're placed really far away from scene origin. So basically, that's that 0, 0, 0 coordinate, right? So this is how the scene rendered in version 6. And if you take a look at it more closely, you're going to see that we have some incorrect refractions happening. We've got some light leaks happening. And if we render the same scene out in version 7, you can see that this now looks a lot better. Now, if we scroll between the two, the difference is obviously huge, and because version 7 is just way more robust. And again, this is going to be useful for all of you that have, your cameras essentially placed really far away from your scene origin. So if you've got a cityscape and you want to render one side of the city and then the other side, and they're really far away from that 0, 0, 0 coordinate, well, this improvement is for you, essentially. Right, then we also have host software improvements, and these are the improvements that were made to the Cinema 4D and 3ds Max Corona implementations, and we're really excited about these as well. We're going to tackle 3ds Max specific improvements first, and what you can expect are some compatibility updates, extensions of existing functionality, and a workflow enhancement update that will increase the speed when opening new scenes. So let's be more specific than that. We now support the latest 3ds Max version. We got some material library updates. That's Corona material library, to be more precise. And then we also have something that's going to make your workflow easier, and that is faster scene opening. Again, we're going to tackle all these one by one, starting with the compatibility updates. Although there's not really all that much to say here, we now, support the latest 3ds Max version, which is 3ds Max 2022. So if you're using that version, Corona version 7 is going to work with it fine. Then we've got some material library updates. And so we've got a whole new category for you, which is called the masonry category. And it has, your typical masonry materials, such as stone walls or brick walls and stuff like that. So if you're into that those type of materials, well then we got something for you there. We also have a couple of new wood materials, and we also have a couple of new metal materials for you to use. Hopefully all of these are going to make your workflow even easier, right? Even better. But then we have a pretty interesting improvement here that we call faster scene opening. And the idea here is that Corona bitmaps and Corona proxies now load their data in the background when you're opening up new scenes, which results in speedups when you open new scenes. So here's a bit of a demo. On the left, you have the Corona Renderer 7 opening up a new scene, and on the right, Corona Renderer 6 opening up a new scene. And as you can see, Corona Renderer 7 took about 40 seconds, and Corona Renderer 6 took about 59 seconds. And that is a huge difference, as you can see. Now, the main idea here is that if you're using Corona bitmaps, you're going to see a speed up. If you're using Corona proxies, you're going to see a speed up. If you're using a lot of Corona bitmaps, you're going to see a more noticeable speed up. If you're using a lot of Corona proxies, you're going to see a lot more noticeable speed up, right? But if you're using a lot of Corona bitmaps and a lot of Corona proxies, then the speed up is going to be even greater, right? So these speed ups kind of stack the more Corona bitmaps and Corona proxies you use. So hopefully opening up new scenes is going to be a funner thing for you to do, essentially. Right, that's it for 3ds Max. Next on, we move to Cinema 4D specific improvements. And this release basically brings major new features to the Cinema 4D implementation, combined with workflow and compatibility enhancements. For being more specific, we now support the latest Cinema 4D versions. We've also implemented the Corona material library into Cinema 4D. We now support multi-instances better than we did in the past. Then we've also implemented, the Corona volume grid. And so if you're doing like VFX work, well, this is the feature for you. And then we also have added some, workflow enhancements. So we've added material override exclusions. More on those later, of course. Then we've also added a nifty little button that'll help you basically how you work with proxies. Also more on that later, of course. And then we've also added tooltips that are sort of there to kind of help you, get acquainted with what some of the parameters do. So let's tackle all these one by one, starting with the compatibility updates. Obviously, we now support Cinema 4D R23 and S24 versions. Not a whole lot much else to say here. If you're using those versions, yay, what a time to be alive now, right? Now, this is a pretty big one, material library, because the Corona material library is now implemented into the Corona for Cinema 4D plugin, right? And so to show you how it works, we have a bit of a demo here, right? So essentially, all you need to do is you need to go under the Corona menu up here, select the Corona material library, and you have all these nice categories and materials available to you, right? As you can see. And to use it, you simply need to select, click and drag your material, drag it into the scene, apply it to your object, and voila, you're using that material, and you have all the materials that are there in 3ds Max as well. That's a pretty big one. Then we have better multi-instance support, which basically now means that if you're running the interactive renderer, we now support multi-instances better. So here's a bit of a demo. So what we're going to do is we're going to switch our instance mode from render instances to multi-instances. We're going to start our interactive renderer, and then we're going to give it a second or two to load up because it is a heavy scene. We're using some fairly heavy assets here. And as you can see, we have our multi-instances in our interactive renderer, right? And you can move around and you can do things there. So now we better support how they work. You can obviously also change the count. And previously in Corona Renderer 6, multi-instances just didn't show up in the interactive renderer. So this is pretty big as well. Then we need to talk about the volume grid, the Corona volume grid that is now available to you in Cinema 4D. So essentially, all you need to do is you need to bring in a Corona volume grid, load it up with your OpenVDB simulation, adjust its emission, absorption, scattering settings, hit up the interactive renderer or the final renderer, and off you go, right? That's how simple it is to use, and we're really hoping that this is going to make it easier for you to create all those light via VFX, essentially. One note that we want to give here is that obviously we support animations as well, so you can use animated open VDBs. You can render all this out in animations as well. So, obviously, yeah, that's really nifty for all of you who are dabbling with light VFX work. Okay, then we've got material override exclusions next here. And so, we've always had material overrides in Cinema 4D, but now you can use material override exclusions. And so the idea here is that, as you can see, we've enabled the material override. We've put in a basic, Corona material, Corona physical material, and as you can see, everything gets overwritten. But with the material override exclusions, what you can do is, for example, you can click on Preserve Displacement, and that is going to preserve all the displacement effects in your scenes, yet everything else is still going to be overwritten by your specified material. You can do the same for glass material properties, right? Glass materials, and you can do the same with light materials. So this comes really handy for for that early look dev process when you're trying to dial in the lighting, because now you don't need to exclude, for example, windows, glass windows on a one-by-one basis. You can just preserve glass materials, and all of your windows will not be overwritten, essentially. Then we have the nifty little workflow enhancement, the proxy duplicate to mesh button. So as you can see, hopefully you can see it, that hopefully the compression is not ruining it. We have this duplicate to mesh button. So if we have our Corona proxy with a loaded mesh, and if we click on this button, we're essentially duplicating that mesh out of that proxy and into our scene. And it's that simple. You just click that button and it gets duplicated out of that proxy. Then, last but not least, we've got tooltips, and these are pretty big. We're really proud of them, really, because essentially with them, they weren't easy to implement, but with them, we're hoping that with the new physical material, you're going to have a bit of an easier time sort of understanding what each parameter does. Now, tooltips are currently only available with the new physical material and in its UI. But if you really like this feature, you can always let us know, and we'll try to expand it to other areas as well. But again, the idea here is that whenever you see this question mark that you see highlighted where the mouse cursor is at right now, if you hover over it, you're going to get this a dialog, essentially, right? Where you're going to get a little bit more info about that particular parameter. All right, so we're sort of at the tail end of our presentation here. That's pretty much what we wanted to showcase when it comes to Corona Renderer 7 here. One note here is that our Corona Academy program, which is an educational program for users who would like to improve their rendering skills and get to know everything there is to know about Corona Renderer for 3ds Max, that program is now available to you online. So if you visit that link that you see in front of you, so that's corona-academy.com, you'll be able to find more info there. But essentially, if you want to learn about parameters and what they do and get into the technical stuff with us, the makers of Corona, well, then you should probably visit that website, because it is now, it's not an in-person program necessarily anymore. It's available online to you, right? Now, if you are a Cinema 4D user, we only have this program for 3ds Max users, but if you are a Cinema 4D user, well then, and if you're interested in the Corona Academy, well then, give us a message, send us an email, get in touch. We're always trying to gauge the interest that people have in this program. So if you are a Cinema 4D user and you would like to see a Cinema 4D Corona Academy, do get in touch and do let us know you want that. All right, so I don't know about you, but I do need to sip a little bit of water here, and our next Q&A session is upon us. So Tom, will you take it away?
I certainly will. Thank you again for covering just so much very quickly. So questions, we have lots of questions. I probably won't get through them all. So reminder. Our forums are always there. We're always happy to help. If we don't cover your question, do post over on there. You'll find the community is happy to answer, but of course, myself and the support team and even the developers are happy to answer those as well. So let me just start blasting through the questions. Will scenes made in Corona 7 work in Corona 6? No. We never guarantee any sort of compatibility going from a new version to an old, because obviously the old version, had no idea what was going to be in the new version. So if you save a scene in 7, it will not render correctly in 6. Once again, there are multi-loaders. You can create, now what we have added is a warning. If you save a Corona 6 scene, load it into 7 and save it, you'll get a warning that, hey, you were about to save in Corona 7, it won't load back in Corona 6. Do you want to make a copy? It will still overwrite your scene, but it will make a copy of it in Corona 6 mode. So we've added a little bit of security for you there, so you don't accidentally break your scenes and can't use them in 6. A couple of questions on Clearcoat. When to use the Clearcoat in Sheen? For the Clearcoat, think of anything that has literally an extra coat put on top of it. So wood with varnish on top of it. A rock if it gets wet. A car paint where the last layer of the paint is a sort of clear sealant. Anything like that, literally a clear coat applied on top of it. That's when to use it. Sheen fabrics is really the be all and end all. Anything that has those little tiny fibers that will be catching and reflecting light differently, that's when you would use Sheen. Can you use Clearcoat for stone? Yeah, if the stone is wet or varnished, you sure can. Can you adjust the transparency of the Clearcoat? You can, using the absorption color. Normally, by default, it doesn't have any, but you can give it a very dark absorption color. You will then basically end up with almost blocking out the base layer, and all you'll see is the reflection and kind of a black or dark green or dark blue or whatever color you've given the absorption. But basically, yeah, you'll be making the Clearcoat less transparent. The volume effect, is it only with the procedural sky, or does it work with HDRIs? Only with the procedural sky, because it's based on physical real-world data and measurements. Obviously, we can't do that with an HDRI. Who knows what might come in the future, but in the minute, only the procedural. Is the volume effect the same as using a volume material in the global environment? No, it's very different. You'll find that the new volume effect in the sky is much, much faster to render. And I'd suggest that most cases where you'd use a global environment volume in the past, use the new volume effect. The only difference is if you need some 3D structure to the volume, you've got fog that's patchy or clings to the ground, then you'd have to use the old Corona volume material. But in most other cases where you just want things in the distance to take on the atmospheric color, yeah, use the new volume effect in the procedural sky. Do these render speedups need the physical material, or do they work with the legacy? Depends on the nature of the speedup. The 32 by 32 block rendering and the denoising speedups obviously apply to either, for example. So it does depend. 2.5D displacement doesn't render mesh edges with Corona wire. Please report that on the forums or by ticket. Why is the architectural glass green in the presets? That was just our choice for that type of glass, the thick, heavy architectural glass. You can change that, of course, and you can have a look at the other presets to see how to get different effects. Should you use the new physical material rather than the skin shader? I'd say no. The skin shader is very specifically created for skin. If you're texturing a character, the skin shader would still be the way to go. It has those multiple layers of subsurface scattering, whereas the physical only has one layer of subsurface scattering. There are things that make skin unique, and that's why we still have the unique skin shader. Does 7 support Macs for 2016? Yes, it supports 2014 to 2022. Although the official support is the same as Autodesk, which I believe is just the last 3 versions. You can check that on our downloads page. Will there be more in-depth tutorials? Yes. When will Corona 7 the changes appear in the Academy? Kind of related. Well, we've been focused on the webinar, putting it together for you all. But with that done, we've already started working on updating the Academy to include the Corona 7 features. And rather than make you wait till we've done them all, we're actually going to release it chapter by chapter. So you'll be getting a chapter that covers Sheen, a chapter that covers Clearcoat, and we'll just release that as quickly as we can. We expect we'll probably wrap up all the information added to the Academy probably around the end of September or just after that. If you don't know what the Academy is, Nate's already mentioned it. It's all about learning the parameters and controls in Corona. So it is by nature much more technical than anything we've shared here today. So if you're interested in that, head to corona-academy.com. What other questions did we have? Oh, OpenVDB format was asked before the second half of the presentation. So yes, it's been in Macs. We didn't cover it for Macs because it wasn't added in 7. It's been there before. It has been added in 7 for Cinema 4D. When will Corona for Cinema 4D work in 4K? I don't understand that question. Please post on the forums. I'm running dual 4K monitors, and Corona for Cinema 4D works fine for me. I believe that was specific to the node editor, but yeah, can I ask you to head to the forums and show an example of what you mean? Can you convert all legacy materials to physical? Yes, the updated version of the converter does that. UVW randomizer are different on the Mac and the PC. Please report, ticket, or forum. Give us some examples. When will you use path tracing over UHD? Well, the 4K cache is actually better than the UHD cache, so I'd recommend using that. Same guidelines as before. If your scene has significant GI, say more than 20–25% bounced light, you'll probably find using a cache is faster. But some outdoor scenes don't have that much bounced light. It doesn't contribute much, in which case path tracing won't be any slower. That's the quick guide. Can you save IOR like in the Seagull shaders dropdowns? You can set a complex IOR, but we don't have like a way of saving complex IORs independent of saving the whole material. If that's what you mean. If not, follow up on the forums. So yeah, you'd have to save the whole material with a particular complex IOR. Is Corona better on Xeon or Intel I processors? All depends on the processor. Check the benchmark, Corona benchmark. We have a results page. You can search by processor type and see how each one performs. A recommended monitor as large as your budget and as large as your desk allows. Let me see. You're all asking even more questions. Let me see. Corona coming for C4D. Thanks for letting us know the interest. Script improvements for C4D. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Should or can I use NVIDIA denoiser on render farms? Please contact the render farm. That would be a question for them to answer. It would all depend on the hardware. Maybe the nodes don't have NVIDIA cards in them. So yeah, check with the render farms about that. Anything new in HDRIs? Nothing new in 7 for HDRIs. When will Corona Academy in Prague be available again? There are no plans to do that at the moment. We have a whole history of the Corona Academy blog that went into our reasons for swapping to online, and online remains our current plan. New scene converter, lots of problems. Do please post examples on the forums. I think I mentioned that last Q&A. There are always going to be some cases that can't be converted because they were set up physically incorrectly in legacy material or possibly in another render engine. And therefore, because they were incorrect on this other version, we can't translate them to be identical in the physical material, which is always physically correct, pretty much. So, but I mean, do please share your examples. We do want to make it as reliable as possible. We do want to catch those weird cases, and even if they can't be converted 100%, make sure that we get the main elements carried across from legacy to physical. But I would ask examples on the forums, please. No questions. Dreams come true. See if anything's going to change. Easier to work. I love you. Thanks to all the team. Thank you. We love you too. That is what. That's why we do all this hard work. We love hearing how it makes people's lives easier and lets them create their art or do their job and get paid. So thanks for the feedback. Any chance of GPU support or Blender in the future? No plans for either at the moment. Corona HDR are needed like V-Ray. Please let us know what you mean over on the forums more specifically. Changes to the caustic solver in 7? No. No specific changes for caustics in 7. Watch the roadmap for any future plans we have. That is the source of all official information on what we're working on. Get the new volume effect. Always necessary to use the Corona sun. Should that be placed opposite to the camera? Should the sun disk be visible in the render? As long as you're using the Corona sky, the volume effect should work. You don't need to add a sun, though I haven't tested, so I don't see why it shouldn't fade to the environment color. But of course, you'll get a much more realistic result if you do use a sun. And no, it doesn't have to be visible. The sun can be behind the camera. It should still all calculate physically, realistically. Does motion blur work now with 7 in Cinema? It works the same as it did before, which is to say there are some things with changing topology. And I think some things with particles and perhaps multi-instances that don't work yet. Again, keep an eye on the roadmap and to report anything specific where you'd like to see it working on the forums. Speeding up network distributed rendering, since it's not working proportionally with the power of the PCs in the network. We need a lot more specifics. Is that team render, back burner, Corona's distributed render? Because we need to know your case. Please head on over to the forums and let us know. Certainly for me, with my little small network of 3 machines, it scales proportionally on both C4D and Macs. But if you're having problems, we'd love to hear about it, because that's how we can make things better. And yeah, so okay, that's probably all we've got time for. Sorry for going so fast, but you guys girls have been great, just sharing so many questions. Thank you. But it does mean I had to blast through those answers super fast. But we're always here. You know where to reach us. We're always happy to help. We like to say when you sign up for Corona, you don't just get the software. You get the whole community and the team as well. So. Yeah, I'd say that brings us to the end of this Q&A. Anything you can think of, Nate, that I missed?
No, I think you covered everything. I mean, from my part, all I can say is thank you to all of you. I'd really like to echo what Tom said. Community is really important to us. This is part of why we do, we're creating the render, right? So thank you, all of you, for coming out in numbers. Thank you, all of you, for asking all these questions, good questions. We appreciate that. Thank you for all of your suggestions as well, and for your kind words. And from my side, well, thank you for being patient. This was our first webinar. There's always some technical hurdles that you need to go through, but overall, I personally hope you've enjoyed it. Whenever you need us, you know where to find us. Thank you from my side. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Tom?
Sure, I'm just going to add my thanks. What a great talk night, and so many who stayed with us right through to the end. That's awesome. If you liked what you've seen here with the latest features, don't forget the summer sale is running right now. You can get Corona for 20% off the regular price. That's for new yearly FairSAS licenses. Just place your order and put the code SUMMER21 at the checkout, and all details over on our Facebook page, of course. A reminder, if we didn't get around to your question or we didn't answer it in full, always the forums, we're always happy to help. And then I did say at the start, if you find this webinar useful and enjoyable, let us know. We'll send you a follow-up email. It'll be totally anonymous, and you can let us know what you thought about the webinar, and basically that will tell us, you know, are we right to do this for every release of Corona? That's our plan. So, you know, we'll be back in Corona when Corona 8 comes out. But, you know, that's only if you tell us this was useful and good. And yeah, that's it for today. I'm so glad you all came along. And it means now I'm going to get to say, see you all next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.